This is London.
This is the BBC World Service from Broadcasting House in London. The news at 0900 hours. French Prime Minister Christian Aubert was assassinated at around 7:30 this morning in his country retreat in Provence. Reports indicate that Monsieur Aubert, leader of the Popular Republic Party, was killed with a silenced pistol along with his wife, Monique Aubert, and their two children, René and Jacques. According to witnesses, a figure was seen rapidly leaving the retreat in a black Renault. The French police are appealing for any witnesses who may have seen the registration number of this vehicle to come forward, and have launched a widespread manhunt in the region. President de Gaulle announced the assassination in a live bulletin from Paris almost half an hour ago, in which he deplored the death and paid his respects to Aubert and his family. While Mr. de Gaulle did not clarify who he believed had committed this treasonous act, national newspapers this morning have not withheld their suspicions. Traditionally leftist paper, Voix de le Peuple, claims that this murder bears all the hallmarks of United Nations rivalry, especially that of Britain or the United States, while the right-wing République Eterne declared that a French-born Russian by the name of Lavrenti Krupin is the guilty party, and that Mr. Krupin was operating under command of the Warsaw Pact's exterior intelligence agency. We will continue to bring you more on this story as it develops. In other news, a well-placed source has informed the BBC that last year's annual report by NASA, the UN space watchdog, may have in fact underestimated the number of orbital facilities under Pact control. Well, today we have with us here Professor Scott Manley of NASA to answer these claims. Professor Manley, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Now, I'm sure our listeners would be interested to know your opinion on these claims presented to the BBC. Is it credible that there could be around 580 so-called space stations in orbit at this present moment?
It would be remiss of me not to dismiss this claim as ludicrous, notwithstanding the amount of fuel, time and material it would take to deliver such stations into orbit. It would also require a great deal of care in the delivery of these stations to ensure that the process itself did not deliver the usual cloud of space debris historically associated with the Pact's launch systems. With that many stations up there, they would be eternally occupied with the task of preventing collisions, with not just the stations, but with the spent launch hardware. A cascading collision scenario, what we scientists call the Kessler syndrome, is a theoretical outcome of a failure to manage such an undertaking. No, given the catastrophic ramifications of an error in judgment, it would be foolhardy to launch so many spacecraft in such a short time period.
I see. Another thing I feel it would be prudent to ask is that with rising public anger concerning the UN's seeming inability to deal with this orbital threat, many people are looking for answers as to why there isn't an appropriate deterrent to Pact orbital installations. What exactly can be done to stop Russia and her cronies from raining missiles or, heavens forbid, nuclear weapons down on our cities?
Well, as your listeners can appreciate, this is a complicated issue. Firstly, within the United Nations, the political situation is rather nuanced, and many of my colleagues have suggested somewhat disparate solutions, each with varying feasibility given the current economic climate. Secondly, I must also stress that many of the schemes under development are of the highest secrecy and are therefore unsuitable for general broadcast.
However, I can assure your listeners that we are doing our utmost to level the playing field with the Pact, and that they can sleep safely in their beds at night, while we and the Air Forces watch the starry skies.
Very reassuring. Is there any chance of us seeing a UN-led program to colonize the stars? Last year's success by the Pact with colonizing the Moon, as well as promised future missions further afield, have arguably caught NASA unaware. Is launching any sort of civilian mission to a nearby planet or moon possible at this point?
Well, that too is rather complex, I'm afraid. The Pact is demonstrating of late an increasing stranglehold over space exploration, something that we at NASA, of course, believe is not only short-sighted, but also morally wrong. Regardless of our opinions, this renders it almost impossible to launch any sort of manned mission these days. So we have, of course, however, had some great successes recently with the Verne probes, whose passage around the moon your listeners will recall from last year, and our upcoming Voyager missions to chart the furthest reaches of our solar system. They are still on time and on budget, so I am sure that we will prove that NASA is more than capable of stellar exploration on our own.
Excellent news. Finally, what is NASA's official word on aliens? Recent skepticism regarding the Roswell crash being a hoax seems to have caught the public's imagination. Is it indeed possible that there could be such a thing as extraterrestrial life?
Oh, goodness knows how many times I've been asked that one. Yes, we at NASA firmly believe that there is a large chance of there being other life out there in the deep cosmos. But if there are any conspiracy theorists listening, hoping for some sort of confirmation about, flying saucers or little green men, then I'm afraid they will be sorely disappointed when I say that I can categorically deny that there have ever been any meetings between mankind and aliens thus far. And I should stress that when we do find life out there, we will not hesitate to let the public know.
Professor Manley, many thanks for your time and your thoughtful answers.
Thank you.
Our final news story this hour regards the continuing search for correspondent Jeffrey Standing, a World Service reporter who disappeared in the region of Alsace-Lorraine in France last Friday. If you, or anyone you know, has spent time in the area over the last week and has any information, we here at the BBC would deeply appreciate if you could inform your local police station. Our thoughts go out to Mr. Standing's fiancée, Laura. That was the BBC News at 0900 hours. The next news update will be in 1 hour. Until then, we hope that you enjoy the Today programme, presented by Ian MacDonald.